currently 11 p.m. at night. I'm starving, and this is my thought process. This is what's going through my mind right now as I'm, a couple weeks deep into this calorie deficit on my way to, losing 35 pounds. Yeah, trust me, I want to eat right now. I want to go out, order an Uber Eats, maybe even go and devour, some pizza. And there's times where I do that, where I allow myself to eat those things and, enjoy the finer things in life. But there's times where I'm completely out of calories. I don't have the reservoir for food to be eating, and you just have to sit in this uncomfortable state. And I like to sit in this uncomfortable state because, number one, it reminds me that I have complete control over my actions. And I think that, being in a calorie deficit and actually being on a fat loss journey teaches you a lot about yourself, teaches you, okay, what and when do you have these things that tempt you? What do you do about them in those situations? And it teaches you a lot about yourself, like what you can handle discipline-wise, what you can't, and overall who you are as a human being when nobody's watching. And I'm not making this video to, oh, look at me when nobody's watching, but basically just as a thought process of it's normal. You go through these things, you're going to be hungry at times, but it's the ones that can embrace the hunger, embrace the suck, like literally just embrace the suck. Because trust me, everything in my mind is telling me right now to go down to the convenience store, maybe go get a protein bar, maybe go get a quick sandwich, and one part of me wants to do that. But another part of me wants to achieve my goals more. And what I'm doing during these times of, okay, I'm really hungry right now, I want to eat a lot of food and, satisfy my craving, is envision, and I read this from like a book called The Hunger Brain. I don't know what it's called, but maybe I'll link it in the description if I don't forget. The Hungry Brain, I think that's what it's called. And it talked about envisioning your goals when you're going through a period and a time of, struggle, when you're going through a time of wanting to cave and not wanting to go through with the things that you're working towards. It's envision, okay, for example, me, how I'm going to look when I reach my goal of 170 pounds. Whether it's for you losing 20 pounds, losing 50 pounds, whatever it may be, envision yourself when you have these moments of temptation, when you're hungry, when you're trying to embrace the suck and you want to fold, you want to give up, you want to go, order some Uber Eats right now. Trust me, that's the first thing on my mind, or even go cook something. But envision, okay, how am I going to look? How am I going to feel? How am I going to, look back at this moment when I get through this, when I get to the point that I want to get to? And is that small hit of, or is that uncomfortable feeling sitting for the next, whatever, right now it's like 11, I'm probably going to eat my next meal at 11 a.m. tomorrow. Is those 12 hours of not eating food really going to kill me? But are they going to get me to my goal? And they will. So I know, okay, I'm going to have to suffer and sacrifice 12 hours of my, food and intake. But it's the small things like this that build discipline. It's the small things like this that, number one, get you towards the goals that you want, but number two, teach you about yourself. Teach you about what kind of a man you are when you're going through this shitty time. And that's what I think, like, a lot of people, they don't want to go on these fat loss journeys. I avoided it for the longest period of time. I didn't want to, lose fat and really stay with it and be consistent because I was comfortable. I was comfortable, looking the way I did. Sure, I felt, insecure at moments and I didn't like the way that I looked, but it didn't bother me enough. And I was just, whatever. I like food too much to do anything about it, and I didn't want to change anything about the way that I looked, about the way that I felt, because food was like a coping mechanism for me, and it was just an easy way to be happy. And eventually, I think you get to a point in your life where you're happy for so long just eating, you're happy, staying the way that you are because things are going, somewhat decently. They're not the way that you want to go, or they're not going the way that you want them to go. But you're stuck in a way of thinking that, like, you know what, it doesn't really matter if I don't change. Like, nothing massive is going to change in my life if I lose whatever 50 to 100 pounds. But it will. It's just you're using those, or at least I was just using those excuses as a coping mechanism not to change, not to do anything about it. And I think that if we really sit with ourselves and ask ourselves, okay, why am I avoiding it? Is it because I don't have the discipline? Is it because, I'm comfortable right now in my job, in my relationship, in my marriage, and, my partner doesn't really care how I look. I don't really care how I look. And is it just like, what's the point? And the point is, at least it was for me, is to do the things that make me uncomfortable. Because when you do the things that make you uncomfortable, you realize how much more potential you have, number one. But number two, what kind of a person you are and to what extent you will go before you give up. And I hope that makes sense, because that's such an important thought, at least, to really reflect on, is how far are you willing to take the struggle? How far are you really willing to take the suck during times where you don't necessarily have to suffer, where you don't have to go through the suck? And that's why I really love, like, for example, comparing it to God and Jesus, for example, because Jesus didn't have to die for our sins. Jesus didn't have to suffer and crucify himself on the cross, but he did it anyway for a greater purpose. And whether or not you're, a Catholic, whether or not you believe in religion, whether or not you believe in God, that's not the point of this. It's the story behind it, that this man didn't have to suffer for our sins. He didn't have to go through that crucifixion. He didn't have to go through all that suffering and embarrassment and torture, but he did it anyway. Because we as humans, I think, get to a point in our lives where we get comfortable. And once we get comfortable, I'm sure everybody that's watching this video, I'm sure you've heard of the comfort zone. Once you get into a comfort zone, that's when your growth stops. And you don't develop as a human being mentally, physically, or spiritually. Really, like the three-dimensional pillars of this life. And when you stop developing mentally, physically, and spiritually, you stagnate yourself. And when you stagnate yourself, there's no room to change. There's no new heights, there's no new things to push towards, and it's the whole, like, the matrix and, like, this whole rat race that people get stuck in. It's like, okay, go to school, get a degree, get a job, get married, and then boom, get comfortable. And then once you're at that comfort state, just live life on autopilot and then shut off. But the problem is, when you shut off, that's it. That's the finish line. And most people hit this finish line at 25, 30 years old and then never progress. They never allow themselves to experience what they could be, who they could become if they just stepped out of their comfort zone. And stepping out of your comfort zone looks completely different to each individual person based on their current comfort zone. And I think that if you just write in a circle what your daily routine looks like, what you typically do, what your overall day in a life looks like, why you do those things. Okay, I go to work to pay the bills. Okay, great. Okay, I eat these things because I know how to eat them and I look this way. Great. Okay, now write things that are outside of your comfort zone and why you would like to achieve them. How, like, just start off with, three things in one aspect. Okay, what's physically outside of your comfort zone? Okay, what's physically outside of my comfort zone? Okay, maybe running a marathon. Okay, what else is physically, or not, now you've done the physical. Okay, what's mentally out of my comfort zone? Okay, you can even put it training for a marathon, right? Because you physically have to get out of your comfort zone to train for the marathon. Physically, you're going to change as an individual, but mentally you're also going to change as an individual. And then you could say, okay, spiritually, will I spiritually change as an individual if if I, commit to this marathon? I would argue that, yeah, you would, because you have to believe. Like spirituality, everybody thinks, oh, okay, spiritually it's only God. Well, no, I would say that spiritually is also anything faith related. You have to spiritually believe that if you put in the work and if you commit to, running a marathon, for example, you have to believe in something that has not yet been accomplished by you in order to do it. So, spiritually you're going to grow because you have an idea and a vision for yourself, and then eventually you're going to get it. So you're manifesting it, and it's spiritually in the flow and form of consciousness. Anything that's consciousness is considered spiritual, right? So you spiritually think this idea, okay, I'm going to run a marathon, but I haven't done it yet, so I'm going to believe and have faith that I can do it. So now you're spiritually building confidence within yourself, so spiritually you're expanding too. And that's why I love fitness, because fitness highlights every aspect of like human reality, right? With that just one goal of stepping outside of your comfort zone, of running a marathon and committing to it, you've hit the 3 pillars that are outside of your comfort zone. So I guess that's the beauty in I guess my thought process while I'm starving during this time, is do things that challenge you outside of your comfort zone and look at the developmental side of it and how you change as an individual. Because the more things that you commit to, number one, suffering, like chosen suffering, the more you're going to grow as an individual and the more you're going to learn about yourself. If you enjoyed this video, like, subscribe, follow. See you guys in the next one. Remember, create more than you consume, serve others, love everyone. Peace.